So up until now, you've learned about matter, anything that has mass and volume. You've learned that mass is the stuff that makes up the insides of matter. It's how many atoms are packed into a substance. But what about that other characteristic that has been created into all matter in the universe? Volume. That's what this lesson is about. By the end of this lesson, you should have a very good idea what volume is and how it's a part of all matter in the universe. Let's start off with a definition. I think you're going to find volume is easier to understand than mass and weight were. Volume is simply the amount of space that something takes up. It's how much three-dimensional space matter occupies. We usually measure volume using one of three units. The first is the most common and is actually the scientific standard unit of volume. That is the cubic centimeter. Now, to understand what a cubic centimeter is, you have to picture a cube shape. If you have a cube and each side of that cube is exactly 1 centimeter long, that cube takes up exactly 1 cubic centimeter of three-dimensional space. A three-dimensional cube with each side being 1 centimeter long is a cubic centimeter. Here's something interesting. Another one of these units is the milliliter. A milliliter is exactly the same size as a cubic centimeter. And that's not a mistake. It was set that way so we can easily convert from cubic centimeters to milliliters and back again. What's the difference between the two? Usually, milliliters is used to measure liquid substances and objects that are solids that have very irregular shapes that can only be measured if they're dropped into a liquid. And then cubic centimeters are used to measure objects that are easily measured with a meter stick, basically perfect shapes like perfect cubes. Meters cubed is just a larger unit for measuring volume, for measuring larger volumes. For example, you can use meter cubed to measure the amount of trunk space in your car. It would be a huge number of centimeters cubed if you use that tiny unit to measure that. So instead we use a bigger unit, the cubic meter. And a cubic meter is simply a cube that's 1 meter on each side. So that's how we measure volume. Now here's a question. Why is volume important? In what real-life applications do you need to know volume? Well, we already talked about trunk space. Another example of a place where it's important to know the volume is when you're mailing something. When you're shipping a package, you are limited in the amount of volume that you're allowed to ship for a certain amount of money. The more volume your package needs to take up, the more it's going to cost you. And that's simply because it's going to take up more space in the truck or the airplane or however it's being transported. It's going to take up more space, and because you need to take up more space, less packages are able to fit in. You should pay more for that package. Volume is the amount of space that a package takes up as well. And then why do substances have volume? Why is it that matter takes up space? Well, it all goes back again to the atoms. Let's take a look at the 3 different real-world substances we looked at in the previous lessons. We're going to take a look at the atoms that make up coal, that make up lead ore, and that make up gold. Here they are. Notice that coal's atoms are very small, but here's the key. They're very spread out. There's a lot of space in between the individual atoms because they push each other apart. That's going to give coal more volume for the number of atoms that it has. Lead's atoms are much more packed together. So the atoms themselves take up space, but they also push on the other atoms a certain amount, so there's space in between them. Lead's atoms are huge, and there's not a whole lot of space between them, so they pack together really well. Lead's atoms don't really take up all that much volume. And gold's atoms take up even less. Even though the gold atoms themselves are very big, they don't push each other apart very far. They pack together very closely. And because they do that, gold typically has a small volume for the number of atoms that it has. It packs together well. Its volume isn't going to be that great. So that's what volume is. Volume is simply the amount of space that a substance occupies. And the reason substances have volume is because their atoms take up space, and their atoms push each other apart a certain amount so that there's space in between them.